Invite me here. So thank you for having me here. I told the speaker the other day, look, it's not as bad as you think, because there actually are three things that toll lower than Congress. And he said, what's that? I said, well, there is Loudon, meth labs in North Korea, so it could actually be worse than it is. Jimmy, I want to thank you for that glowing introduction. It's always hate to follow Jimmy Duncan. He's already covered about everything that needs to be said. I'm going to end up today talking about, just for a minute, about American exceptionalism, but I want to mention that just at the very beginning. Bob, thank you and for bringing Jimmy up for Pam's service in Johnson City. It really meant a lot to me and gave me the strength to stand up to see friends like Jimmy that took time away from their families. And believe me, your time is very valuable. I know that. To travel to Johnson City and do that. And if you, let me tell you this, man, it tells you about his heart. You can do different than Jimmy Duncan, but you cannot do better. So I will say that and mean that he took me under his wing when I first got there and showed me the ropes where the bathrooms were and so forth. We don't know that. Very helpful at my age too, I might add. But he is a true leader. And listen, the committee he is on is going to be front and center in about 6 weeks in May when the highway bill comes up. So this is someone that he says people listen to. This is a man that very quietly, and he also sits next to Hal Rogers as his best friend, who's chairman of the Appropriations Committee, and that doesn't hurt any. I want to tell you just a short story about my wife, and then we'll move on and say a few things. Well, when she was having her funeral, I went down with my daughter to get some personal things. The funeral home wanted me to do that, and of course, you never look in your wife's makeup bag. You don't. If you do, guys, there's something wrong with you. So I'd never done that, and she had this beautiful little patent leather makeup bag. So my daughter handed it over to me, and I unzipped it and opened it up, and there was a little bit of makeup, and then there was some tissue, and then there was Werther's, and then there were 12 .380 rounds in there. She had a full clip for a .380 pistol, but in case that wasn't enough, she had another gun. So that's the kind of woman I was married to. She was a true Southern girl, and was one of the most giving people in the world. And I found out, we had, as many of you all probably have, I'd raised, and she wrote all the checks at home and took care of that. So we had raised this child in Honduras, and this child had already grown and done about 15 years. I also found out I was raising a kid in Brazil too, I didn't know about. So she was a neat lady, and I'm going to miss her tremendously. I thank you all for having me. If I get teared up, I'll just sit down and we'll be through. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in Middle Tennessee on a small farm and learned how to work as a very young kid. And I remember we didn't have, I was telling Lynn, and this is a lot of people, we didn't have indoor plumbing or running water. But I had a great mother and a great dad. My mother's still living today. She's 92 years old. And she's in our house, and my wife's her primary caregiver. And so we're going to have some issues there at the Road household. But I remember one summer before I was in college, I say this joking, but there's a lot of truth in it. It was a burning tobacco patch that convinced me organic chemistry was not that hard. So I can tell you that is hard work. And so that farm taught me a lot about what it is to be an American and what it is to love this country. And you know, I was in Johnson City. I had medical practice, delivered almost 5,000 babies, and I found out when you run public office, if you deliver your own voters, it worked out pretty well for me. I saw so many patients, nurses at the hospital that I had delivered, that my wife was an OB nurse, that we had delivered together, operated on together, that came up and shared that time. It meant a lot to me to be able to see those young people become successful. And as the mayor of Johnson City, I had a very simple philosophy as the local government here, and we talked about this on the way in. The very best government you have is local government. It's the closest to you. You get the best bang for your buck. And let me tell you, the further away it gets, the worse it gets. And I want to give a shout out to our state people. On the education committee that I'm on, you are talked about here in Tennessee across the country. As a matter of fact, President Obama actually really stole Tennessee's idea, which is the Tennessee Promise. And what they're doing is investing in the future of this country so that businesses will look at Tennessee and move their businesses here, because we'll have an educated workforce. And when I was a young person, I went to college and medical school. My dad worked in a factory that made shoe heels, and my mother was a bank teller. I was able to go to college and medical school in 7 years and graduate with no debt. I talked to a young student that was seeing my wife, a medical student the other day, a young woman who graduates in May with $290,000 worth of debt. We're not going to be able to get these bright young people to go do this and want to make these sacrifices of a decade of their life to take care of us. So we're going to have to do something about that, and Jimmy is absolutely right. It's the next big debt bubble. It's bigger than credit card debt, much bigger than credit card debt now that these student loans are. You know, the first thing we do, we're going to do it next week, is a budget. And the budget is a document we're going to pass next week that hopefully will balance within 10 years. If we can get a Republican in the White House, then I think we can make that happen. President Obama's budget never balances. Let me just very quickly tell you about how our budget works. About 62% of our budget is mandatory spending. That's Medicare, Social Security, food stamps, interest on the national debt, Medicaid, and so forth. But we've got to pay those bills. Today, in this country, 10,000 people turn 65. We owe them Medicare today. So that's a liability unless we do something about it. It's going to swamp us. Only about 38% of the budget we debate every year and go through the appropriations process. Let me tell you how frustrating that was last year. We passed 11 of the 12 appropriations bills out of committee. 7 of them went to the Senate. Reid never took up a single bill, not one, including the Veterans Affairs bill, did not take up a bill. So when you see that kind of obstruction, you realize, and basically the House got blamed for it. If it was not for the House representatives being in Republican hands, you would not believe what this country would look like. And I'm telling you, the first 2 years I spent in the minority, I was walking off the House floor with a good friend of mine in Pennsylvania, G.T. Thompson, and I said, why? This running every 2 years is terrible. And I said, we should have 4-year terms. And he stopped. He said, Phil, stop right there. We said, take a look at that bunch over there. He said, I wish we could run every 6 months. Get ready. I told you, I could not agree more with that after having been there in the minority. So as ugly as it looks, it could be a lot worse if we did not have Republicans, conservative Republicans. As a mayor of Johnson City, we balanced every budget with a surplus. When I took over in 2003, we had $2 billion in the bank. When I left to go to Washington, D.C., we had $24 billion in the bank. And we did not raise taxes. That's the way it ought to be. Families do that. You do it. Local government has to balance. The state does it. And they make tough decisions. We print money and put future generations of young people in here further and further in debt. And let me tell you what would happen. The interest rates went back to 6%. Remember those? Everybody does. 6%, the biggest line item in our budget would be interest on the national debt. That's how bad it is. In 1970, 5% of the national debt of our debt was held by foreigners. Today it's almost 50%, 25% by the Chinese. You want to be beholden to the Chinese? I do not. And that's why we have to get our budget under control. Debt, if we don't get it under control, we've basically mortgaged our children's future. And that's not why I got elected to go to Congress. Each time I vote, and I know that Jimmy Duncan does this too, I ask myself about 3 questions. Is it constitutional what we're doing? Does this face constitutional muster? Does it protect the nation, and does it shrink the size of government? We shrunk the size of our government in Johnson City from about 1,000 employees down to about 1,000 to 900. Nobody knew we missed the 10%. I promise you, you could take the federal government and cut it by 10% and nobody would know the difference in the services that are provided. You got a 1.5 million active duty military and 800,000 civilian contractors. It's 2 1 contractor or 2 soldiers. That's ridiculous to have that kind of bureaucracy. I thought there was no way to make the speeches, the politician speeches. The Veterans Affairs Committee did it this last Friday. And I'll tell you what they did. We've worked on this now for a while. There's a VA hospital being built in Aurora, Colorado, right outside of Denver. It started planning in 2003. 2010, they started building this hospital for veterans. It was going to cost $600 million with $10 million in change orders. That has been pushed back to 2017. And we got the new final tally on that. And hold your hat, Jimmy, when you hear this. This $600 million hospital is now going to cost you, the taxpayers, $1.74 billion to build a hospital. I've helped build 4. And if you're in the private sector, they just cut your money off. but they keep coming back. It is amazing the incompetence. And what I said to the secretary, do you have any idea how much health care I can provide for $1 billion to veterans who desperately need it? How many men and women with PTSD or amputated legs or whatever, how many buildings I can build across this country? And I told them I wouldn't let the VA now build a pup tent. I think somebody else ought to be building their hospitals. They shouldn't be allowed to build another hospital until they can show they can do better. Obamacare, I want to just spend a minute on that. I really told my wife, I said, Pam, I'm either going to quit going to the surgery post-op lounge and complain about what's going on in America. I'm going to shut up, or I'm going to try to go do something about it. This is one of the worst pieces of legislation that's been passed. It is the worst piece since I have been in there. Look, the idea of lowering cost and increasing access, which is President Obama said he wanted to do, was a noble. And to cover more of our people was noble, and to reduce the price of care. Look, I'm the one out there having to see people who didn't have any insurance. And I don't live in a very wealthy area where we are in Northeast Tennessee. So I saw those problems, and I had solutions to those problems. And those solutions are not big insurance companies. Those solutions are not government. Those solutions, medical decisions should be made between the physician and the patient. And believe me, having spent 37 days straight in the hospital with my wife, I am more committed to that than ever. And I can tell you that's who should be making those decisions, is our patients and doctors, not bureaucrats. And right now we have that, and I can tell you, let me give you the story of two eyes. Left eye, right eye. Left eye was before Obamacare. I had a cataract fixed. My insurance was about $5,500. The insurance covered 80% of it. I had this cataract fixed last August with Obamacare. I paid about $4,300. My insurance paid about $1,200. In our hospital, we have a large, I was on the faculty of the medical school there. We have a large hospital there. 60% of the uncollectible debt now are people with insurance. The very people Jimmy Duncan was talking about, the middle class, their out-of-pockets and co-pays are so high they cannot pay it. When you have $6,000 and $8,000 and $10,000 out-of-pockets and co-pays for families, if you make $35,000 a year, it might as well be $100,000. You cannot pay that. I have written a Republican alternative for the Republican Study Committee for the Obamacare repeal, if we can get it done. There's a big court case, as you guys know, King versus Burwell, that the Supreme Court's going to rule in June of this year. We'll find out. It basically dismantles Obamacare if that happens. And I am hopeful that that happens because the patients certainly deserve better. My insurance premiums are up 80% since I have been in the Congress, 80%. I can afford that, but most families cannot afford that. So we have to do that, and I hope we are successful. Talk just a minute about energy. You meet a lot of neat people when you go to Congress. This week, T. Boone Pickens was in. You know, amazing guys, 85 years old, 5 marriages, been a billionaire, lost it all, gave $1 billion away. I don't know how much the guy's worth now, still drilling oil wells. And he said if the United States of America hadn't been as successful as they have in drilling for oil, the oil would be $200 a barrel. Last year, America made the largest gains in oil production, the 3rd largest in the history of the world. That's how much we're producing. We have the largest carbon reserves in the world. In the world, if you take natural gas, coal, and oil in this country. We went from 4.5 million barrels a day to 9 million, and that's why the world is awash in oil. And let me just say, our city won the Green City of the State and the National EPA Award for the use of methane when I was mayor. We heat and cool our VA hospital in Johnson City with methane gas produced by our landfills. I don't need a lecture on environmentalists, okay? I'm going to hear that. But the answer, my friend, ain't blowing in the wind. I can tell you that for energy. I quote Bob Dylan years ago. You can, where it works, that's fine, but I can tell you right now the thing that's helped the average citizen where I live, that lives in Stony Creek in Carter County and drives to Johnson City to work, is gas at $2 or less a gallon. They put that money immediately in their hip pocket. Who enjoys going to fill up their car? I love it, $25 instead of 50 or 60. You don't remember anything, remember this number right here. Every 25 cents gasoline goes up or down, it affects the U.S. economy about $35 billion. So we just put $170 billion into the taxpayers' pockets that not government tells them how to spend. They tell themselves and their families how to spend it. And that's what we ought to be doing in energy. And why in the world we wouldn't pass the Keystone Pipeline is beyond me. I will never understand that. The oil is going to get burned. Why wouldn't you use it in a country that uses oil the most environmentally friendly that you can, US of A? And let me tell you, when they talk to you, when you get the environmentalists talking to you, just put this little statistic back. China produces more carbon dioxide, emits more carbon dioxide in the world than America, Canada, and Mexico put together. So think about that. We're the only industrialized nation in the world to actually reduce carbon pollution, US of A. Immigration, I'm going to be very brief on